Well, guys, welcome back to Decoding Babylon. And today we have a very special episode. And of course, they're all special, but this is our Christmas special where Bryan and I are going to totally ruin Christmas for everybody. No, we're not going to do that. But we are going to talk about a lot of the traditions and just things that we just normally just associate with Christmas, and we don't. Probably most people have no idea why. And believe it or not, Bryan actually just recently wrote a book about Christmas. So Bryan's going to take the lead on this episode, and I'm going to listen and I'm going to chime in when I have to say.
Yeah, guys, there's a book. It's The Origins of Christmas Tradition. And you can just go to demonrazors.com and it should be under the resources tab. You guys can download it. It's a pretty short little book, but it's got images of all the things like Krampus and talks about some of the origins of that. I know this is a topic that a lot of people are always asking for. I'm sure they probably ask you a lot, JT. Like, talk about Christmas, talk about Christmas.
Yeah,
dude, I get it so much, and so it's like finally, it's like, all right, we're gonna talk about Christmas now. And I gotta preface this, like, this is some dark stuff, guys. Like, this is like straight up. There's like evil, demonic stuff. This is really dark stuff. But the celebration of Christmas, we're not telling you to celebrate or not celebrate. We're just giving you information. And if you feel convicted in your heart, like, hey, maybe I shouldn't do that. Like, that's between you and God. That's something that you can decide between you and God. Hey, maybe I shouldn't participate in that kind of activity, because there is, Jude 1:23, it says, saving others by snatching them from the fire and others by showing mercy mixed with fear. Hating even the clothing stained by the corrupted flesh, hating even the garments stained by flesh, the Bible says, right? And so, like, this holiday has some pretty stained garments. That's all I'm going to say. Like, this has got a lot of stained garments stained by the flesh, and you can recognize that in some of the traditions. But there is a common theme throughout this whole Christmas thing that I kind of want to bring up, and we'll get into some of that a little bit deeper. But first off, I want to talk about, this verse in Jubilees. A lot of people don't read Jubilees. It's a text that we found some of it in the Dead Sea Scrolls, so it's got some validity to it. But not a lot of people, you just don't hear about the book of Jubilees. But this is a very interesting verse in the Jubilees, and it's on the first page of the book that I've got here. For this reason, Jubilee 6:37, for this reason, years will come upon them when they will disrupt the order and make an abominable day the day of testimony, and an unclean day a feast day. And they will confound all the days, the holy with the unclean, and the unclean days with the holy. For they will go wrong as to the months and Sabbaths and feasts and jubilees. Like, how do you feel about that verse? I don't know what you think, but that pretty lays it out pretty good.
Well, I think that's the interesting part about this, and I guess, like, as Bryan, you already said, like, we're not going to tell you can't do something. I mean, obviously, there's certain things that are obviously very explicitly sins in the Bible, and then there's things that are not. And so, obviously, living in sin is never okay. But at the same time, like, are you clear in your conscience? Yeah, this is a faith thing. And so, actually, as you go to that verse, I want to go to a verse in the New Testament that I just remembered was Colossians. It was 2:16. Therefore, let no one pass judgment on you in questions of food and drink, or with regard to a festival, or a new moon or Sabbath. So to me, it's kind of like, again, like, we're going to lay it all out there, and then you guys decide what you guys feel about it for, after that.
Yeah.
Because I think that, like, ultimately, if you believe you're celebrating the birth of Jesus, I'm not going to pass judgment on you about that, and I'm not going to give you a hard time about that. I mean, that's, Bryan and I talked off air, and I said, Halloween to me is very clearly just evil.
It's unredeemable.
Yeah, nobody pretend, like, they call it All Saints Day or whatever, All Hallows Eve. nobody I know is celebrating the saints on Halloween. They're celebrating the spirits and they're dressing up like them.
Mm-hmm.
Now, I do know people who do worship Jesus on Christmas. So that's, to me, that's like, so I believe that if you say that you are, obviously I have no reason to say you're not. But no, but that is interesting because I do think that it's like, it seems very clear that's a prophetic verse about like the fact that, you know, you think about the Israelites originally were set apart, right? So they were not going to take part in all the pagan stuff.
Mm-hmm.
But then eventually they go into the land of Canaan. They don't push everybody out of there like they were supposed to, and then therefore that little bit of leaven gets in there, and all of a sudden their traditions are just getting changed or they're combined, and then obviously, you know, thousands of years later, the Romans and everything. Now it's like everything's just this mishmash of weird, and that's what I was even saying to Bryan as well, like that. When you look up the traditions, you can always have somebody say Christmas is pagan straight up and somebody say, no, it's not. And you're like, there's a bigger case to be made that yes, it is. Mm-hmm. But like the people who say, no, it's not, there's a lot of cover because there is so much like jumbled up stuff. But I mean, like overall, that's what I think. It's like, it really is. It's like this big pot of gumbo. All this stuff is thrown in there. And where's Jesus in there? Well, he's in there somewhere.
Yeah, they just threw him in.
It's a little bit messy in the way, though.
But yeah, so there's some few more verses I want to go over. I guess is Colossians 2:8. It says, "See to it that no one takes you captive by philosophy and empty deceit, according to human tradition." Okay, according to the elemental spirits of the world, and not according to Christ. Okay, so it does talk about like human tradition. Like this is a human tradition, you know, and we can use it for the purpose of celebrating Christ. Absolutely, you can celebrate Christ every day, right? You know,
you should. As a Christian, you should.
You should, absolutely. So, but yeah, so let's talk about. I think we should get into some of the traditions, because I think a lot of people. Here's one other thing: people are like, you know, it's imagery. You know, it's. You know, I still celebrate Jesus, and you know, the Bible in Exodus, you know, 20, you know, it says, "Do not make for yourself an idol." So it's like of any kind too. So you know, there's a lot of idolatry that goes on at this time, and I think that it's you know, Matthew 15:3, and he answered them, "And why do you break the commandments of God for the sake of your traditions?" And this is something that should subtly give you some conviction as to like what these things are, and you know, if it does, it doesn't, whatever. The Bible says he moves you from glory to glory. Okay, and I'm going to say one more thing is that, you know, God, the condemnation is not something that comes from the Lord. Okay, and condemnation is definitely not from the Lord, but conviction is. It is from the Holy Spirit. And so like if you feel convicted, cool. If you feel condemned, it's probably Satan whispering lies into your ear. So like don't feel that, for sure.
Let me start at the beginning though, because of course I just did a video about this recently, and this is the second year I talked about this. December 25th is not Jesus' birthday. Okay, like I think most people who obviously have common sense know it's like, how do they know when Jesus' birthday was? Because like obviously if you read the Bible, I mean, it doesn't talk about our months, and obviously. What would be the markers for that?
Well, the shepherds were in the field tending to their flock, and at night, it's like, would they be in the field tending to the flock out in the middle of the night at a cold temperature time? That would be freezing. That would be
I think some people think, oh, it's in the Middle East, so it's warm, but it's really not, because even like I know in Matthew 24 when Jesus talks about the abomination of desolation, he's like, pray that it doesn't happen in the wintertime or like on a Sabbath day, because it's hard to travel in the winter. So once again, Mary and Joseph were traveling to pay their taxes because it was a census. It was not just a normal tax. This was, they were paying taxes because it was a Roman census. And despite all the bad things the Romans did, they were not uncivilized. They understood they weren't going to make masses of people travel in a day that was very difficult to travel. So they would not have made them do that in the wintertime.
Yeah.
So I think, so like those are the two smoking guns of how it wasn't there. And I believe also there was a little bit of you could use Zechariah and Elizabeth when Elizabeth is pregnant with John the Baptist. I think they say like she's pregnant. I think they could determine based on when she was pregnant, I think she was like 6 months pregnant, and then you could determine based on how old the difference between John the Baptist and Jesus, and you come to September, and then I said I go into like Revelation 12. It talks about signs in the heavens, and it's talking about the woman clothed with the sun, 12 stars at her head, the moon at her feet, and obviously I'm not going to take all credit for this because I learned this from like people like Michael Heiser, and he was saying based on the other historical events that we can date Jesus' birth. They said this could only happen in an 80-minute window, and that would be September 11th, 3 BC. And it's like, that is insane. And somebody was saying like, oh, well, the calendars change. And I said, but God, praise God for this, because God made our sky a clock. That's why it's important that that's in there. So when you think about all those historical markers that are in there, so somebody could say, you can say, like, how can we know? It's like, I believe this, that's what it says. And that's what it's talking about. Like the stars in the sky that God set in the firmament are for signs. And that was one of the signs was, of course, the Messiah, Emmanuel, God is with us being born. There would be signs in the heavens for that. And I believe there was. And
yeah,
that being said, so if you're celebrating the birth of Jesus on December 25th, you can do that. Just know that ain't his birthday.
Yeah, definitely not, for sure. And there's the interesting correlations with Christmas and the dates is like it's so convoluted, and there's a lot of people that will say things like, oh, Saturnalia is actually one of the big feasts that we actually get the word Christmas from. And Saturnalia is, they're like, there's this debate like, oh, they actually moved Saturnalia to this day, or Christmas because the Christians were celebrating it on this day. Okay, like all of this is nonsense, and like the reality is we don't know. Like we don't know. We can't pin it down, and we can guess, and we can try to do the best guesses that we can, but we just don't know, and we weren't there. Like, so we could like take off of the records, but nothing said it definitively. So we can look at the stars like he was saying, and you can get some pretty close estimates. You were gonna say something?
I was gonna say that and this is the part 2 that I haven't made yet, of course, but by the time this comes out, it'll probably be made. Whose birthday is December 25th? And of course, everyone's gonna say, everyone's got the answer. The birthday is the birthday of the sun.
Yeah.
Like the sun. What sun? The sun, the sun. And so I think this is where you get into the pagan sun god mythology. So you can pick a sun god, and they're all born on December 25th. And then you get into like this stuff with the zeitgeist saying that Jesus is a copy of all of these sun gods. He's not.
It was all made to alter that. They manipulated your language literally and made words in English be these same similar words. They did it on purpose to literally make confusion of this. That's why it's like that. That's why it's all like that. Everything's like that.
Yeah. And it's also the interesting part about it is that the devil and all the mystics and all these people, they knew about the signs in the heavens too. And so they were trying to make it be about them, but they didn't know the whole story. But so the interesting part about that is like, so the pagan dying and rising sun mythologies is like this whole kind of this resurrection. And so that's what I said. I think to me, what you can see is a very clear sign that happens every year is said on December 21st, the winter solstice, the sun goes down to its lowest point. It stays there. Check this out. It stays there for 3 days, and it goes down to a place, and it hangs on a place that they call the Southern Cross. So the sun goes down for 3 days, and on December 25th, it starts to rise again. And it's like, I kind of getting chills just thinking about that. So all the things in the heavens point to Jesus. And I do believe that the sun was made to be a sign for him. And that's why he's like, he'll give you the morning star. So like, I think that Jesus is, that's why there's some confusion about this, where the devil is trying to co-opt things that are of Jesus. But again, like God put these signs in the firmament. God put these signs in the heavens for him. And so that's why like the pagans knew that the sun rose again on the 25th. Yeah. And that's why, like I said, Mithra, Horus, Tammuz, pick a sun god, and they're all born that day. Now, but really, that's what I said. I said, to me, the cool part is like, it's not really a sign of Jesus' birthday. It's like, it's a sign of his resurrection. I mean, he hangs on a cross. And I think to me, that's why it's like, again, I think that's kind of cool. And I think that's why, like, if you do want an excuse to celebrate Christmas, like I think that again we celebrate that every day. If you're a Christian, that God sent His Son and He rose again. So
yeah,
I do think that's kind of interesting.
So let's jump in, guys. Let's just jump in on talking about some of this stuff. One of the things I do want to mention before we get into this is the manger concept. I don't know if you heard about this, JT, but they Jesus was placed in a manger. And I looked up a bunch of old images of a manger, and I was like, what is a manger? Like, what is an actual manger? And a lot of people are like, oh, it's a feeding trough for animals. Well, if you look up old mangers, they're all made out of stone. Okay? They're all made out of stone. They're not made out of wood. And they all, it's like this stone carved cradling spot that actually has a hole in the bottom, like a drain. So it's obviously not for a feeding trough for water, because the water would just drain out. And it's obviously not a feeding trough for food. And so you realize what a manger actually is. I started doing some digging, and a manger was when you had a lamb that was selected for slaughter, they would swaddle the lamb and place him in the manger, which was like a holding trough for the baby, so that way he didn't like get hurt or whatever. And so Jesus was interestingly placed in a manger. Like, how iconic was that? And it was like, just like, because he was going to be the sacrifice. And that was just something that kind of was very fascinating when I was looking into it. I was like, dude, a manger is not a feeding trough. It wasn't just some hay barrel thing that they put him in. So I don't know if you've heard about that, but it was very fascinating when I started looking into it.
I think you told me that, honestly. I think I remember hearing that. That's interesting.
Yeah. It's super interesting. But now so now let's just break into some of the original holidays. So we've got Saturnalia. All right. Saturnalia, it was a Roman holiday to honor all kinds of pagan debauchery, guys. Like, this is a day where like they went into, like, pedophilia was suddenly, like, it was like accepted, and all these behaviorals was like celebrated. Like, the roles of the servants would pretend to be the masters, and the servants and the masters would pretend to be slave servants, and they'd flip roles, and it was just a day of chaos and pagan debauchery. And in fact, the word having a gay old time comes from this term, because like gay actually meant like to like be lewd or lascivious, like to like break out and just do what you want. It didn't just mean happy, guys. Like, it meant like do
what thou wilt.
Yeah, do what thou wilt, exactly. And so that was the term having a gay old time actually comes from. Like, and so we see this reflected in our Christmas traditions today, and it's just like it's such a like fitting title to call it, because it's like that's legitimately what it was. And so like this is where like kissing under the mistletoe it came from. It was like a sexual reference to all kinds of like pagan debauchery things, like, oh, just randomly kiss whoever you're having, and it actually has to do with orgies. Okay, this is like literally what this was about, and it's like very disturbing. Very disturbing holiday, very disturbing thing. So when you look at old drawings of Saturnalia and the gifts and the stuff, which I have pictures and depictions of some of the stuff in the book, but it represent you can see the stuff, you see the artwork. It's like, wow, this is disturbing. Like, this is like straight up a perversion day.
Wasn't that a day they gave presents to? Like, that's what they did on Saturnalia.
Yeah, they did. They gave little presents and little icons or little idols they would create and craft, and like, little things that they would use for all kinds of debauchery purposes. So it was like it was not like a day of celebration of God in any way, shape, or manner. And this has been going on since, for a very long time. Okay, so this has been going on for way back in the day. This holiday had existed.
I think that's what we should like. I don't know if that went without saying it. That's why when you say Christmas, it's like they were celebrating something this time of the year for as long as there is history. As long as we have records of it, they were celebrating something at this specific time of year.
Yeah.
So like so again, now was it always about Jesus? Obviously, I mean, at the very least you could say, well, before Jesus, they didn't celebrate Jesus. So what were they celebrating then?
Yeah, exactly. And so now let's break into some of the traditions, like, and some of the things that, like, the decorations and the tree. Everybody wants to know about the tree. What is the tree, right? Okay, should you put a tree in your house? Is it bad? There's a Bible verse, okay, that talks about a tree kind of thing going on. I don't know if you guys have read it or mention. I guess maybe I'll read it. And Jeremiah 10, 3-5, it says, for the practice of the peoples are worthless. They cut a tree out of the forest, and a craftsman shapes it with a chisel. They adorn it with silver and gold. They fasten it with hammer and nail, so it will not totter. Like a scarecrow in the cucumber field, their idols cannot speak. They must be carried because they cannot walk. Do not fear them. They can and do no harm, and they nor can they do any good. Okay, so like straight up, this is like talking about idolatry, and it's saying don't fear them, but like this behavior, this trait, they would cut down trees, and it's mentioned in the Bible, and they would bring it into their house, and they would adorn it with gold and silver. What is that about? Well, this was a pagan druid practice, and there's like records of them doing this tree cutting ceremony and all these things that goes back pretty far back. You heard the expression "knock on wood." You've heard that one, right? Knock on wood. Okay, what does that mean? Well, that was because the druids and the people believed that there were spirits that would be kept in the trees, like demons and deceased entities would reside and live in the trees. So they would like cut the tree down, bring it into their house, and then adorn it with fruit and food and gold and silver, and try to give it gifts to see if the demon spirits would accept the gifts, and they would inhabit the items, and then they would give that item like a poison apple, essentially, that would be hung on the tree, would become poisoned by the spirits going into it or whatever. And it was like this kind of thing. Or they would take the branches and turn them into wands. They did this for like ritualistic practices to create paraphernalia or stuff like this. And the pine cone, you'll actually see it. It's holding hands by the Anunnaki are holding the pine cone like this. You'll see the pine cone. But like you'll see him holding a pine cone. You'll see the pine cone used in like different pagan stuff. The pine cone was representative of the pine tree, obviously, because the pine tree was believed to be like sacred and ritualistic because it like was, forever green or whatever. And so like they had all these ritualistic things that they would do with pine trees or holly trees, and that's what you see the holly branch at Christmas. You see the holly. They use the holly for that. Well, yeah. Well, what's Hollywood? Oh, yeah. It's also wood that was used to craft wands and staves, guys. This is where this holly branch comes from. This is why it says, the holiday season and all this stuff connected to it, right? And then they would put the star on top of Christmas trees. Like we see the star going on top of the Christmas tree. Dude, that's the Star of Baphomet, okay? And surprise, surprise, people like to be like, oh, no, it's the Star of Bethlehem. Dude, oh, it's right side up. It's right side up. Dude, look up Baphomet. The star on his forehead's right side up. It's not upside down. People are like, oh, it's not upside down. It's not Baphomet star. Yeah, it is. And it's representative of the light that he carries on his head. And that's what the star on your Christmas tree, it has a significant, it's a sigil, guys. It's a demonic sigil. Like this is how you write demons' names and these symbols and these signs. And so this is actually where it stems from. Like we've obviously turned it and like Christianized and be like, no, it's Jesus. It's the Star of Bethlehem. No, dude, it's the Star of Baphomet. Like, and it's straight up. You can see it in the imagery. Look it up. Google this stuff. Like, search it. I'm sure we'll put some images in there. But Saint Nick was a druid himself, guys. He was a druid. He was in an occult, and you can see old pictures of him walking around with goats. He would ride goats. Okay, what's the goat? Obviously not Jesus. Okay, it's not the lamb. And he would be like going around with goats, and he had his druid staff, and he would be dressed in all green. It wasn't until Coca-Cola turned him into the red guy. But originally he was this green druid dude that came from the forest. And so that's what that's from. And there was like the cutting of the holly and the cutting of the mistletoe ritual druid practices. Okay. That's why there's mistletoe. Like it comes from a druid practice because they would use it to make tinctures and all kinds of stuff. And so all of this stuff is a cult. Like no matter what we try to like spin it as, this is where it stems from, And so did you want to say something, JT?
Well, I was just thinking, when you go back to Jeremiah, obviously he's talking about crafting idols.
Yeah.
And so like where they would craft idols from, they'd make it from wood or they would use some kind of stone. And if you think about like where the Bible mentions all the times about like the kind of two places where they told you not to go or not to do is there was high places, which you can imagine on some kind of mountaintop where they would do sacrifices.
Mm-hmm.
And then there was obviously these sacred groves. And if you think of like coven witches and all that kind of stuff, yeah, they're going to the forest, and if you see, you just watch a Disney movie.
Watch it.
Like what they do in the forest, they're dancing around with the animals, and they're this one with nature kind of a thing. It's like that's where that whole kind of thing comes from. But I was wondering, because I looked this up, and again, if you go look around like the pagan calendar, what you have on in December, I think it's somewhere between December 21st to like January, is Yule.
Yep.
So Yule
We'll
is
talk about
like
that.
the pagan celebration, and it's like Yule is a big combination of all these things, and so a lot of people believe that a lot of the it's so funny how this always comes up. It's the Germans, guys. If you've got a German heritage, sorry, but I mean, like the Germans are like responsible for a lot of what, like Germany gets Christianized probably by the Romans, but then all these traditions that they used to always do somehow find themselves into like our Christian holidays. And so like what I found interesting was they associated Yule with like wild hunt that had some kind of association with Odin. So if you think about Norse mythology, Thor's dad is named Odin. And if you look at what Odin looks like, you change Santa's outfit and he looks a little bit like Odin. And it's like I don't think that's a coincidence that he's got this. Just think about the whole idea that Santa can fly. All right, now think about it like that. Okay, so like, why can he fly? You know what's interesting? If you look at some old pictures of like Thor didn't used to just fly. He actually used to have like a cart that got pulled, and I think it was goats. I think he had multiple goats that pulled this thing that he flew in the sky with. So again, like this is very similar, and it is a lot of times you see Thor looking like Chris Hemsworth. Thor looks like his dad because Thor and his dad are basically the same, like all these pagan mythologies. And I think that it's this combination of the things,
mixing of idolatry and blending of cultures.
Well, right, and it's like I think that's why, like, you know, everyone's like, oh, you guys say everything's satanic, everything's pagan, but like when you think about it, like, okay, so if this is about Jesus again, like, so where do you get any of the traditions we do?
Where does any of that come from Jesus?
I mean, like, where any of them come from the Bible? And then you'd be like, well, I mean, they're not really there. So like, where they came from somewhere, and they're very old. And, continue.
Yule. And so interesting when you say Yule, like there is a so many components to this story of Christmas. It actually has multiple origins, guys. Okay, Saturnalia is like the oldest origin that I could find. But like when it comes into like other origins, there is in Yule, and there's the Yule log, which is like a representation of some type of sacrifice. There's the Yule ham.
There's the Yule goat.
Yes,
which is like
the Yule goat. Yeah, and there's the Yule ham, and so the Yule ham was actually a sacrificial. And this is where you get the Christmas ham, guys. It comes from the sacrificial pig. They would sacrifice and kill a pig. This is where you get Christmas ham from. I'm not even joking. It's disturbing when you realize it was a sacrificial practice. They straight up talk about it. That's the Yule ham. Like this is not a happy, you know, oh, what's the Christmas ham represents Jesus, guys. No, this is disturbing. Okay. Like, and so we're participating in these things. We just don't recognize it. And so like there's the Yule lads, which is one of the stemmed ideas of where we get the elves from. And the elves, there's a whole nother subject, but we're going to jump into this, I guess, right now. But the elves is very interesting because it's actually where you get the word elf, okay? Elohim, Michael, Gabriel. El means of God, okay? So the elves were supposedly people of God, some type of spiritual being. And that's what the elves are, and they're fallen angel Nephilim. And this breaks into another story. But first, I'm going to tell you there's two components to the elves. One of the theories in multiple stories that they are kidnapped children. Okay, they are children that were kidnapped. And you'll see the character of Santa Claus, who, by the way, is Saint Nick. And Nick means actually nothingness. Okay, old Nick is old nothingness, meaning like, because that's what they would call Satan. Like, oh, he's old nothingness. But that's where the term old Nick comes from. Okay, so it actually was a name for Satan. You recognize the term Old Nick. You can look it up at etymology.com. I'll tell you, Old Nick is literally another name for Satan.
But what about people who would say Saint Nick comes from Saint Nicholas?
Yeah, I would just say further down the line, they distorted things because Nick is from, its etymological roots are much older than Saint Nicholas. And so like that name and that relation to it, it has there's a lot of connections to it. But yeah, there and either way, even Saint is interestingly similar to Satan. and then Santa Claus, and then Satan's Claus. And I mean, there's all this etymological stuff where it all kind of blends together, and you don't really know. It's kind of vague, but it sounds real similar, and you're just like, this is weird. This is kind of strange.
What I find interesting is obviously the elves are always shown to be little, right?
Yeah, because they were children in some stories.
Well, possibly children, but I find interesting, like you go to like a movie like Lord of the Rings. If you think about what Tolkien's showing you in Lord of the Rings, I believe it's very clear that the elves are
Elohim.
Angels.
Yeah,
they're angels because they're gleaming. Yeah. They're all good looking. You know, they usually got like this beautiful hair, and they're very good at everything.
Yes.
And so if you think about it, like Erwin, is that
I think so.
That goes with the king, and so she was in love with a man.
Yeah, the half.
And her dad's telling her that he's going to die, but they're not going to die.
Yeah.
You know, like, so again, like the elves and associated with angels.
And it even goes further, because actually in Lord of the Rings, one of the high priest, Galadriel, is like she's like the dark elf that they take the ring to, and she kind of like does this freak out move where she gets all scary. Dude, do you know, like, if you read the book of Enoch, it talks about one of the fallen angels' names that deceived Eve in the garden. His name is Gadriel. Okay, like Galadriel and Gadriel, kind of similar, and you're like, this is weird, because it's literally the Elohim. Elves is just a short for the Elohims. So that's
is it possible that like, again, like the elves, the small ones, like obviously little Nephilim, that they came from the angel. They came from the angels, and they, for some reason, again, it's very bizarre. Obviously, this is the kind of confusing parts about like the Nephilim stuff, is the fact that some are giant,
some are tiny,
some are wee sized.
and there's so much to this, guys. Like the small creatures, like people just think that the angels made it and only made giants. They made giants and they made small things as well, guys. And there's so much to that, and that's something that we'll be talking about. And I mentioned a little bit of that in the documentary Ancient Angels. So watch it if you haven't watched it yet. But yeah, the Uads are these children that have been kidnapped, and basically they're like they show disgusting characteristics, like the pot licker, the spoon licker, and it's like they're just weirdly disturbing characteristics of these children that have been kidnapped by this woman named Gorilla. Okay, Gorilla is the woman that eats children, okay, and kidnaps them, and this is their story. This is I believe it's Iceland or wherever it is. I forget right now off the top of my head, but this is the tradition. The Norse people, that's what it is. Yeah, and so the Yule lads come from, and Gorilla goes around with taking children, and she's a goat. She's a hybrid goat creature. Okay, she's like bottom half is goat. She's got goat horns, and she eats children. Okay, she eats children. Now we can get into a little bit of Krampus, because it sounds.
That's what I really want to know about Krampus, and it's like there's this duality with Santa Claus and this other being that would, again, like, this is so strange because it's obviously is Germany where they come up with this stuff, right?
Yeah.
Like, what is up? What's up with the Germans in that? And like, like, what is like that hasn't. I don't think most Americans have probably heard of Krampus until they had a horror movie. Like, I don't know if it was like a B horror movie, like, that came out like 10 years ago. Like, I mean, because I never heard of it,
and it's disturbing, really. But like, Krampus is actually derived from another story, where Saint Nick actually kidnapped, and this Krampus actually is also another version or sort of consideration of an elf, actually, as well. So he's an elf, okay? So which he's half goat, half humanoid goat creature man. Okay, this is Krampus, and this creature. He gets imprisoned by Santa, okay, or Saint Nicholas, okay, whatever you want to call this mysterious figure, which his name is obviously elusive and very confusing. He imprisons this Elohim creature, right? That's got horns. He's a goat man, okay, and he makes him into his slave, and he imprisons the demon. It's called a demon in older stories, actually, and Saint Nicholas is actually known for fighting demons and imprisoning them. And we get this other character called Schwarty Pete. Okay, Schwarty Pete. Have you heard of this guy? Or
I've not heard.
Black,
I've not heard of him.
Yeah, Black Pete, Schwarty Pete. You got to show a picture of this guy because, dude, it's a man in blackface is actually where this comes from, and this is the tradition.
Oh, nice.
Yeah, they would paint like they would get people and paint their faces black, and they would be considered the demons that Saint Nick would have imprisoned. And this is another embodiment of these elves that Satan would imprison, but he imprisoned demons to make toys and work for him as his slave. Okay. And that's who you see Krampus. He's just another variation of a demon that's been imprisoned, but he also happens to be a goat demon. And so you're like, this is a whole nother culture further along that's still got this goat demon thing going on, all the way up into Saturnalia, where you also see images of Pan, the goat god Pan, who kidnaps children. Mind you, Krampus kidnaps you if you're bad, okay? Gorilla kidnaps you if you're bad. Pan kidnaps you just for the fun of it, I guess. And then, like, you know, you've got all of these goat-esque humanoid figures kidnapping children. And this is where it gets really weird. We're going to talk about something really weird.
But what about like is it Krampus who's always shown with like the whip? Long tongue?
Yes, the long tongue, which that's a demonic.
I mean, so obviously, I think it's very easy to see. And of course, if you think about like in this stuff in the out east, where they've always got their tongues sticking out. But I mean, just the way it's presented when you see the pictures of Krampus with children and his tongue all out. I mean, one, it's either he's going to eat them.
Yep.
I mean, or it's obviously some kind of nasty sexual looking thing. Like it's disgusting. I mean, it gives me the chills looking at it. Just put it that way.
Absolutely. And there's other characters along with this mythology that I didn't even bring up, but, you know, other than Schwarty Pete, there's other ones where there's the Whip Man, who actually was another incarnation of Santa Claus in earlier states, where he walked around with a whip and he kidnapped children. This was actually, so you'll see old pictures of Santa Claus shoving children into bags. And it's like he was kidnapping children. Guys, what are they doing today? They're still kidnapping children. Like, people are still kidnapping. This is where these mythologies stem from. Is like kids going missing. Things like this, guys. It's really disturbing, demonic, humanoid-esque creatures. And you know, whether Santa Claus is a good guy or whatever, but it's also, we don't know, but it's paying homage to Solomon, actually, which is from the Lesser Keys of Solomon, another ancient occult witchcraft book that don't read, okay? But like, unless the Lord's obviously telling you to get some understanding, I wouldn't recommend it. But the Lesser Keys of Solomon, Santa is Solomon. It's actually a representation, and Solomon imprisons demons to work for him. Well, Santa imprisons demons to work for him. And that's what the elves are. Elves are demons that are imprisoned to work for him. Okay? That's literally what this stems from.
It's interesting, even Santa Claus, it's like he still sneaks in people's houses at night.
Yes, it's creepy.
Which is like, you know, like generally that's frowned upon.
Generally,
you know,
it is frowned.
When it's not Christmas time. Like, no, I don't want anyone coming into my house and obviously sneaking in. Definitely not leaving out milk and cookies for them.
Yeah.
I mean, that's just in itself is strange that like that's ever been, you know, like just to talk about this for a second. The whole idea of Santa Claus, if it's not a replacement for Jesus, if the season is about him, I mean, obviously, just think about how the world sees us as Christians. We believe in fairy tales. I get told that all the time. You believe in this book, fairy tales. You believe in all this imaginary stuff. And so the world is teaching their kids about this imaginary guy in a red suit. And then one day they're going to find out Santa Claus is not real. And then they're going to be like, well, you lied to me about Jesus too, right? That's imaginary. And so they think everything's a fable and a fairy tale.
It's such a setup. It's
obviously a setup. And I mean, just the very basics of it. It's like, if it ever was about Jesus, well, people don't treat it like it's about Jesus, because they treat it's about Santa Claus. Santa Claus is on everything.
And deceiving your children.
They're deceiving your children. You have to lie to them to tell them the presents are coming from him. And also, you're making this season about the presents when can we all just be honest? Can we get real for 1 second? Like, people like to look back at Christmas time as like this rose-colored goggles about how great it is. But everybody who's in the thick of it is stressed. Are you done? Have you bought all the presents? Gosh, it's expensive this year, isn't it? What do I get? What do I get mom and dad? What do we get them? What do we get?
And is giving a gift out of necessity really even as heartfelt? It's like
No. Can you imagine if you flipped it around a little bit, where you said, "Hey, let's not do any presents this year, but we're gonna buy all the presents, but then we're gonna slowly give them to people throughout the year," and how much more appreciative they would be.
mm,
Instead, it's like, "Well, did I spend enough money on them? Are
mm,
they gonna like this?" And all this kind of stuff. And it's like it ends up being way more stressful than it ever was. And it's like you really think about it. Does God want you to feel like that
mhm,
on His birthday? And if you think about it, like, gosh, I have heard this quote recently, but it was saying like people have never had so much money and stuff and never been so poor in their whole lives.
mm,
And it's like that is us
mm,
today in America,
for
where
sure.
we have so much, but gosh, we are broke these days as far as like our money's
Mhm,
not worth that much. We're getting stuff we don't need. And obviously we're having to buy stuff that we don't need. And obviously Santa, or like I said, which could be an anagram for Satan, which is a lot of people believe,
yeah.
like guy in a red suit, it's like it's
Mhm,
about him because Santa's got to bring the presents regardless of whether the kids are poor or not. You guys ever see that in the movies? The kids still get presents on Christmas, so the parents still feel obligated that they got to stick those presents under the tree, and
mhm.
it's never okay for the kids not to get presents because that is what the season is about.
Yeah, it almost makes you unappreciative. It makes your children unappreciative for the things they are already getting throughout their entire life, and it makes you almost like. I wonder how much more giving of a society we would have if it was just like perpetuated that we just give. You know what I mean? Rather than
Mm-hmm.
obligated to give one day of the year, then it diminishes your responsibility to give to others down to a single day, and then you're like, well, as long as I fulfill that day, I don't need to give anybody anything.
Right,
It's
right.
it's
And God loves a cheerful giver.
yeah, yeah.
He doesn't like
Mhm.
anyone giving out of obligation. But yeah,
Absolutely.
but we have our
Mhm.
birthdays and we have Christmas.
Yep.
And
Yep.
then obviously we have other little holidays throughout the year, but then we give presents, but like yeah, everything else. And then it's
Mhm.
like, yeah, it really is almost like those other days don't matter as much, even though those should matter more. When hey, remember when I bought you that coat?
Yeah.
It wasn't Christmas. I
It
just bought
wasn't
you the coat
Christmas.
because you needed it.
Yeah.
And but like no one really cares about that
Mhm.
because hey, what are you giving me for Christmas this year?
Yeah, man. So it's such a the depravity of our society because of this Christmas behavior and the way it's made. I feel like it's diminished our societal perspective on life. And people are like, "Oh no, but it's a good thing. It's a good thing." I don't think it's a good thing. But that's just my opinion. This is my opinion. Like, and then lastly, I'm going to tell you about one more thing. Okay? And this one's really weird. It's Rudolph, okay? Rudolph the red-nosed reindeer. All right. This one, my friend of mine, we were looking through stuff and we were checking things out, and she found this, and she was just like, "Dude, like, because I'd been questioning this, and she totally found this, and and it was surprising, but there is a demon called Furfur, okay, and it's
Okay.
really strange. The demon's called Furfur. Look it up, and it's a humanoid fly human-esque, like anthropomorphic reindeer human. Okay, it's a reindeer hybrid. It's a furry. Okay, like straight up, it's a furry. It's called Furfur. It's derived from a term called furcifer, which sounds a whole lot like Lucifer. Okay,
Lucifer?
I'm not even kidding. I'm not even kidding. Furcifer,
Oh my
which
god.
actually it also derives from furrier, implying that it's a type of entity that is covered in hair, which there's a whole nother connection to that. But then there's also the fact that it can appear as an angel sometimes. Okay. And this is Furcifer or Furfur. And he has a tail that's lit on fire. And he's like a reindeer anthropomorphic dude with a glowing tail. They just moved the glowing tail on fire because it wouldn't work good on I guess it's like a pulling of other demons. And he's a leader of a horde of demons. Okay. And he's
Wow.
responsible for a bunch of different things. He's responsible for controlling wind and weather. Rudolph, with your nose so bright, guide our sleigh through the night. Like, what do you think that is? Like, it's very reflective of Rudolph being this demon Furfur, who is literally, again, another anthropomorphic image of what you would call Cernos. Basically, he looks like
Yeah,
Cernos. Yeah.
that's exactly what I was thinking the whole time. I was like,
Mm-hmm.
okay, so there's all this goat association, but then where's the love for Sir Nunos?
Yeah.
Because it's like
Cernunos. Yeah.
he's exactly the same
Mm-hmm.
as Pan, except for it's like it's the region of the world where there probably wasn't goats, there was deer. So he was a deer instead of a goat.
Yep, and that's all. It all ties back to the same thing. And the demon Furfur, I believe trying to remember if he kidnaps children or eats them. I think he eats people.
Of
Or
course
something.
he does. Of
Um,
course he does. Everybody else does on Christmas.
everybody else, yeah, of course. And so you see this. Now. There's more disturbing stuff. I think Schwarty Pete was probably the most like what when I saw it, because I was just like, are you kidding me? Like, this is ridiculous. Like, and the people still dress up in blackface. I think there was like a debate like a few years back where they were like, should we even do this? Continue it, but like this, all of these conditions, all of these traditions blend together into this pagan humanistic holiday, and then they took a little bit of Jesus and sprinkled it on top, and we're like, ta-da, it's for Christians too. But it's all paganistic, animal human hybrid worship, demons being enslaved worship, like eating children, sacrificing animals, making idols, bringing them into your house, like all of it's wicked. It's all wickedness, and you can't get around it. Like you could try to Jesusify it all you want, but it's very questionable. Like when you look at its origins, it's like, all right, I don't know. I mean, I don't know. Maybe we can redeem holidays as Christians and just be like, okay, so today, guys, we're actually not going to celebrate the massive sex orgy day. We're going to celebrate Jesus. Like, I don't know if you can get away. I don't know if that works like that, but hey, that's what we've done. And I don't know. I know that the Bible verse says hating the garments even stained by the flesh. And that's where I feel, and this is where I fall, where it's like, okay, this has definitely been stained by the flesh. So that's just my perspective.
Well, I'm gonna try to bring it back a little bit to give a little bit of cover for those still having to celebrate. Because I'll just say this, that again, like as you go back to like saying I pretty much appall Halloween, even though I still didn't tell you. You go back to the episode, I still didn't tell you not to celebrate.
Yeah.
But obviously, I do know good-hearted people who do celebrate Jesus, and it's interesting. I'm going to use a couple cartoon examples. Mm-hmm. The Peanuts, the Charlie Brown Christmas. It's so funny how that actually is a pretty good story, because it's like Charlie Brown laments the all the commercialism in Christmas, and he's just like, this is really not what it's about. And at the very end, Linus tells the Christmas story as the Bible would say it, and about the birth of Jesus, and talks about the angels, and the songs are good. And it's like, it really is. If you watch that movie, it's like or that cartoon, I really do think they get it right. Like, I mean, I feel like that's what, like when you boil it down to that, even it's funny, like the Grinch of all cartoons, because the Grinch laments all the stuff like I just complained about saying it's all about this, the Tertinkers and the Flukers or whatever. And it's all about all this other stuff instead of like what it's supposed to be about.
It's funny that they made the Grinch, because it's almost like pointing at any Christians that would balk against this, be like, you're just a Grinch. Like, but continue.
Right, but it's almost like in a way it's a good message, because he took all the stuff away and they still were going to celebrate. So then he gave it back, and it almost feels like that if you were celebrating not because of the stuff, then the stuff in itself is not bad.
Yeah,
and I think that honestly, I think as a Christian, I think that makes sense. It's kind of like if you seek first the kingdom of God, God can give you things of the world because He knows that that's not why you're doing anything. So if you're celebrating Jesus, it's okay to get presents.
Sure.
But if you're looking forward to the presents more than the time with family, loving and talking about Jesus and the stuff He's done for you, well then we've got it wrong.
Yeah. Spend time with your family. Love them. That's like, make it the holiday. Like, spend it with your family. That's what you're supposed to do.
It's funny. We missed the opportunity. We were going to talk more about Thanksgiving. Of course, Thanksgiving has pagan roots too. But I was saying like that I think the older I've gotten, the more I appreciate Thanksgiving. Because again, obviously there's pagan stuff. We could have went into that too. But like the overall message is being thankful. And actually there was a thing about Thanksgiving that didn't used to be about a day of the year. And this is how it got mixed into some paganism. There used to be like a time of Thanksgiving after like God did good things for the people, and they decided they were going to have a feast and give thanks to God. I think that's obviously what Christmas would be getting it closer to what's right if it was a little more like Thanksgiving, meals, family. It's not about the stuff. It's about time together, not rushing around, just buying stuff, for the sake of buying stuff. But I do believe that overall, maybe like what I would say to try to leave people with is, the traditions of men, as Bryan brought up earlier, like when you start doing these other things, like know why you're doing them. And if you're still saying, well, I like the way it looks, you know, like obviously that's between you and God.
Mhm.
But like a lot of the weird stuff, it's like, yeah, the things that you just like don't do anything religiously, because that's what it
Mhm.
is. When you put up things just because this is what you're supposed to do, that is the definition of religion,
Mm.
right? Like tradition, religion, they're
Mm.
pretty much the
Mhm.
same thing. Like that's what Jesus was lamenting about the Pharisees. You've made other rules that go over what God has said,
Yeah.
because
Mhm.
you guys have set these rules higher than what God has said.
I wanted to mention one more thing. I thought this was fascinating. Is that I don't know how many people know this, but like when it comes to tradition, like you're saying, did you like back in the day, the Puritans like they outlawed Christmas because of traditions. They thought it was offensive. There's actually a law. You can look it up. It was a ticket for celebrating Christmas, and they wrote it because they were like they considered it paganistic and offensive traditions that were being held, and then they were being carried over. I don't know. I just thought I'd mention that because it's so
No, I mean
fascinating.
that's a good point, because
Mhm.
it's kind of like, if you imagine if you were just
Mhm.
imagine if all you had was your Bible and you were
Mhm.
stuck on some island,
Yeah.
and then you made it to the civilized world, and then you were like, hey, what's everyone's doing in December? Like, what's this about? You would have no idea
Yeah.
what any of
Yeah.
this was about. You'd have no idea based on what the Bible says. And
Like,
so
what
like,
is this?
but I'm sure, like, I'm sure what the Puritans probably saw is they saw people migrating from Europe bringing their traditions here that had nothing to do with what they believed, and that's why they realized what it was about. But again, like that's what we were saying. I think that, like, as America is a melting pot, a lot of Europe was a melting pot,
Mhm.
and you think over thousands of years, like it's a little bit messy. And I think that's why I would just encourage everybody at the end of the day to, you know,
Listen to your
look
heart.
in here, look in here, pray to God, and see what you feel comfortable with doing after this. Because is Christmas pagan?
Yes.
Yes, Christmas is pagan. The Christmas traditions are pagan. Celebrating the birth of Jesus is not pagan. Of course, that's not pagan. Obviously, we can take time to
Mm-hmm.
celebrate that God sent His Son, and the story of Jesus being born is an awesome story. We'll never get tired of it. So I think over at the end of the day, that's what you really have to do. And I think that if you've got kids, make sure you emphasize that,
Yeah.
and not just that he was born. And I think that
And don't lie. Don't lie to them about Satan Claus. Terrible idea.
you shouldn't lie to your kids.
No.
You should not lie to your kids. But I wanted to say this, and I remember my a friend of mine brought this up. A lot of people think about the suffering on the cross. So like, let's just for a minute, we're gonna pretend like Jesus was born around December. So just think about the suffering he did for us. But actually, if you think about the nativity story, he suffered from the very beginning, because being born in a manger, like I said, as Bryan pointed out, a place where they
Sacrificial.
sacrifice lambs.
Mm-mm.
Jesus lived like a pretty destitute life for most of his life. I mean, obviously, you see his parents didn't have any money. You know, there was no room at the inn. Obviously, they didn't have enough money to get into any place. They had to stay in basically a barn. And so Jesus had a rough upbringing. You could imagine how horrifying that would be for young parents, giving birth in that kind of setting, and then the kind of life that he had after that, getting chased into Egypt because they were killing babies and stuff. So
Yeah.
so God sent His Son to live the most humble life ever, and suffered the whole time, not just at the end, the
Mm.
whole time for us. And I think that if you remember that on December 25th, then I think you're going to be okay.
Yeah.
That's I'll just leave you with that.
That's great. That's it, man. Nailed it.
All right, well, guys, Merry Christmas.
Yeah.
We love you guys, and we'll see you on the next Decoding Babylon.
Out.